to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, the landmark legislation signed into law by President Jimmy Carter in 1979, which has served as the backbone of the United States' relationship with Taiwan and its approach to cross-strait relations. So to begin, Miles, U.S.-China relations with Taiwan are very complex. On what basis does the United States conduct its diplomacy with Taiwan?
Okay, the U.S.-China relationship and, for that matter, U.S.-Taiwan relationship are guided basically by three sets of documents. Number one is the set of documents collectively called the three communiques. So number two is the six assurances, and of course the most important one is the subject we're talking about today, that is the Taiwan Relations Act. Let me just briefly summarize what there are. The three communiques refer to, number one, the February 1972 Shanghai Communique, negotiated elaborately between Henry Kissinger and his Chinese counterpart. And that laid the foundation for the ensuing two communiques. And the second communique was issued on January 1st, 1979, between the Carter administration and China. That is the day that marks the beginning of the diplomatic recognition of China by the United States. The third communique, which the Chinese government loved to cite, is the so-called August 17th communique. That was signed between the Reagan administration in 1982 between China and the United States. That mostly deals with the arms sale. The three communiques were basically useless because of the Chinese totally misinterpreted and deliberately on two issues. One is that in the three communiques, the two issues are U.S. position on Taiwan, and so-called, in other words, the one China policy, or China called one China principle. And the other issue is really about the arms sale, right? The peaceful means. Let me just say a few words on that. Why Chinese misinterpret the words negotiated and insisted upon by Mr. Henry Kissinger, who actually is brilliantly done in this regard, was that the United States acknowledges the Chinese position that there was only one China, and the People's Republic of China is the sole representative of that, and Taiwan is part of China. So the key phrase here is the three words, acknowledge the Chinese position. Acknowledgement basically means in this context is that we're aware of this, that China holds such a view, but we never say we agree with it or not. So the words acknowledgement actually has a double meaning, as you know. It's kind of ambiguous. So the Chinese use that kind of semantic ambiguity and to completely misinterpret the U.S. position on that. That is, China said this is the basis of one China principle. In the Chinese version of translation of these three words, Chinese said, 美国政府承认中国的一个中国原则。承认 is acknowledgement. In this case, in the Chinese case, is clearly 100% means agree to. So while in fact the United States has never agreed to that, it's just that we want to know that we're aware of this Chinese position. Secondly, is about the peaceful means. So that means arms control. Arms will sale to Taiwan, U.S. troops gradual withdrawal, as agreed to in the Shanghai Communique and subsequent the Carter China second communique. So the third communique, called the August 17th communique, in that case that the Chinese sort of bamboozled the Reagan administration to indicate that there will be no condition in which the U.S. would gradually withdraw or stop the weapons sale to Taiwan to the ultimate halt. And it was very clear by the Reagan administration that that was not the case, because President Reagan issued an internal memo on that day. And also on that day, United States government, with the approval of the Reagan administration and Secretary of State Schultz, sent a cable to President Chiang Kai-shek at the time in Taiwan through Deputy Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger. This is the basis for this 6 assurances would be the basis for the U.S. position officially. That is, I'll talk about the 6 assurances subsequently. So the Chinese basically said there will be no condition U.S. is going to stop selling weapons to Taiwan. That was never the case. So because of these 2 key misinterpretations of these 3 communiques, in my view, the 3 communiques were totally useless. The Chinese insist upon that. So 6 insurances, right? We talked about that one. The Taiwan Relations Act is the cornerstone of U.S. policy toward Taiwan in particular. In this case, also related to China because it touches upon some of the major issues, particularly Taiwan status and the One China policy.
And so going a little bit deeper on the Taiwan Relation Act itself, what exactly does it say and do?
Taiwan Relations Act was adopted, was signed into law by President Carter reluctantly on April 10th, 1979. But it took effect retroactively on January 1st, 1979, on the day of U.S. switch of diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. There are several salient but crucial components of this Taiwan Relations Act. I can say about the 7 of them, right? Number one, the Taiwan Relations Act provides legal protection for Taiwan, even though it does not have U.S. diplomatic recognition. Taiwan Relations Act is American domestic law. So it provides the legal protection for Taiwan in the United States within the American legal jurisdiction as if it is still a sovereign nation. So Taiwanese cultural exchange, Taiwanese properties in the United States, and Taiwanese technological innovation investment in here in the United States, it will be treated as if it's a foreign sovereign country. Number 2, and I think it's also very important, is that it says in Section 4 and Part 4 of this act, and it said the United States government cannot exclude or expose the Taiwan government from any international financial institutions or any other international organizations. So that's why it will be illegal for the United States to oppose Taiwan's inclusion in those international organizations. I think number 3, in Section 2, Parts 3 and 4, which is very crucial. That is, the Taiwan Relations Act ensures United States government to make sure that Taiwanese government would have enough self-defense capabilities to deal with the threat from China. So this is a very important, most crucial part of the security guarantee security insurance by the U.S. government. And once the U.S. government, in this case, mostly the U.S. Congress, because the Jimmy Carter administration never meant to add that security insurance to cover Taiwan. So number 4, in Section 3, Part 3 of the Taiwan Relations Act, it also sort of says specifically who should be the authority to decide whether U.S. is going to commit military forces to prevent China from the military invasion of Taiwan. It is traditionally a presidential privilege. So President Carter wrote in his diary profusely on this. He's right about that. But this Taiwan Relations Act says that it should also Congress should also be included in that decision. So that gives extra prudence to declare war on to commit U.S. military forces to defend Taiwan. And number 5, in Section 2 and Part 6, which is amazingly far-sighted in this case. By the way, this Taiwan Relations Act were drafted by a bunch of very, very sophisticated, smart senators and congressmen, and it was really a piece of a masterpiece, I should say. I quote in Section 2 of Part 6, it says, United States is going to maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or the social or economic system of the people on Taiwan. Now, this is about ensuring the United States itself would have the capacity to resist the Chinese military threat against Taiwan. 45 years ago, a group of very smart congressmen and senators envisioned what is going on today. That is the intense military, technological, economic competition between the United States and China. So that's the number 5. Number 6, in Section 15, Part 2 of the Taiwan Relations Act, it has a very meaningful and important consequential definition of what is Taiwan, right? Taiwan covers which area and what organizations, entities. It basically have two very important takeaways. In the Taiwan Relations Act, it inherits, the U.S. government inherits the legacy from the Eisenhower administration of the strategic calculation that Taiwan means two major island groups, Taiwan Island itself and also the Pacific Doors, or in Chinese called Penghu Liedao, Penghu Islands over there, right next to Taiwan. Those are the largest islands in the Taiwanese island chain. But it excludes specifically the offshore islands. That will be much closer to China's coastline. Quemoy, Jinmen, and Mazu in particular. And then that would include also Pratas and the faraway island in the Spratly Island. It's called the Taiping Island. So this is a very important definition of Taiwan. In other words, the Taiwan Relations Act and all other U.S. defense agreement with Taiwan would not covered those offshore islands. And in this section about definition of Taiwan, there is a very peculiar last sentence, which is very important. It says, the governing authorities on Taiwan recognized by the United States as the Republic of China prior to January 1st, 1979, and any successor governing authorities, including political subdivisions, agencies, and instrumentalities thereof. That means Republic of China is recognized is part of the fall into the legal definition of Taiwan by the U.S. government, but also any other succeeding governments. In other words, if Taiwanese voters tomorrow vote to change the name of Taiwan officially from Republic of China to something like Republic of Taiwan, this would also be protected by U.S. law. So, of course, Taiwanese voters were not doing that right now. So, those number 7, I think the last one is also very normally people forget to mention about this. I think this is very important. In Section 2, Part 3 of the Taiwan Relations Act, it specifically emphasized the importance of promoting human rights in Taiwan. Now, this is a time when Taiwan was still ruled by a dictatorship under President Chiang Kai-shek. And because of a strong push by the human rights activists in the Congress, particularly Senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy, and also Congressman from New York, a Democrat, Stephen Stollarz. And so this clause was included. And this is tremendously important because this was instrumental for Taiwan's democratization about 10 years later. When this was debated, Taiwan Relations Act the bill was debated in the Congress. Several leading Taiwanese human rights activists actually showed up at the hearings, and it was a major morale boost to Taiwanese human rights promoters at the time. So encourage dissidents, and as we see, that the Americans should be very proud of ourselves for being a enabler of Taiwan's democracy. So those are basically the key and salient components in the Taiwan Relations Act. I think they're very, very important.
It's incredible, as you say, how far-sighted this document was. And you mentioned, background in terms of how this fits in against the 3 communiques, the 6 assurances, the other sort of documents governing our relations, as well as the tension between the Carter administration and Congress. Could you talk a bit about the background in terms of actual cross-strait tensions at the time? What was the relationship like, or the tension, between Republic of China and the People's Republic of China?
Okay, so obviously the tension between China and Taiwan had already been there for decades, but there are a lot of efforts by the U.S. government to reduce those tensions. So one of the things that is, of course, to enhance deterrence. That's one reason why there was a 1955 Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty between Taiwan and the United States. Now, President Carter obviously was determined to end that treaty, which he eventually ended up doing just before he left the White House. There had been growing frustration within Congress about secret diplomacy since the time of Richard Nixon. The opening of China, as so poetically depicted by the Nixon administration in 1971, 1972, was hailed as some kind of triumph of American diplomacy. But procedurally speaking, the Congress was not notified at all. There was no prior notification. It's a secret. It's basically the geniuses from the White House and from China sat together behind a closed door and negotiated away some of the very important piece of national interest. So the Congress was not very happy about that time. And this time, in late 1978, on December 15th, 1978, President Carter went to the national TV, suddenly announced his intention to recognize People's Republic of China officially 2 weeks later. Congress only knew about this an hour before that. So the Congress was stunned. So they finally had enough of the secret diplomacy, and they said, we're going to do something. And that's one of the reasons why Congress took action. Now provided sort of background to the genesis of the Taiwan Relations Act, which is officially called the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act. Having said that, when I say Congress, it was really congressional. It's a bipartisan. Some of the leading advocates, promoters of this bill in the Congress were Democrats. They were up in arms against their own president in the White House. One of the leading figures was the senator from Idaho, for example, Frank Church. And of course, there's a lot of other prominent figures too. Stephen Solarz, I mentioned, who's a Democrat from New York, and he was leading proponents of this bill in the House. And in addition, you have Senator Barry Goldwater, who's a staunch supporter and defender of Taiwan, as well as Bob Dole from Kansas, and New York Republican Senator Jacob Javits. So those people are very, very instrumental in doing it. This is bipartisan. So this rebuke to this kind of American executive branch's addiction to secret diplomacy. Secondly, I think this background is also very important. Up to that point, there is this kind of Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger strategic wiles, if you will, of playing the China card. The primary motive those days was to outmaneuver the Soviet Union. Cold War was going on. To reach that goal, China was only used as a card for the United States to play. China, in and of itself, is never the target of American diplomatic focus. So we use China to reach some other strategic goals. That kind of a foreign policy legacy continued on for the ensuing decades. But at the time, Carter administration totally adopted that. So they want to play the China cards to reach some other goals. The the fact is the reality is that China basically played the U.S. card much better, much more adroitly. So the Congress said, we got to stop that kind of stuff. So this is another background in that. By doing so, we almost entirely neglected the internal dynamics and political logic of China. Because if you read the President Jimmy Carter's diary, he regarded Deng Xiaoping as a reformer, a progressive, and sort of prone to market forces. And he actually hailed his decision to recognize China as the reason why Deng Xiaoping, 2 days later, after his announcement, after Jimmy Carter's announcement to America, wrote out a resolution after the third plenum of the 11th Party Congress, 11届三中全会. Jimmy Carter was completely wrong on that, because the major reasons why Deng Xiaoping was so gung-ho to make the deal with the United States, because China at the time faced an imminent danger from the Soviet Union. Because several months before that, in November 1978, the Soviet Union had signed a mutual defense treaty with China's now renegade former friend, Vietnam. So Deng Xiaoping decided, in order to establish his authority and reputation within the Chinese People's Liberation Army, he would have to command the military and to attack Vietnam, to invade Vietnam. In order to do so, he ran the risk of the Soviet Union would attack China from the north because of the mutual defense treaty with Vietnam. So he came to the United States to play the U.S. card, to use the United States as the deterrence against Soviet invasion. He did an admirably good job. He came to the United States, and Jimmy Carter was very, very happy and treated him with state dinner and invited him to go to eat the Texas barbecue and go to see the happy farmers in Iowa, those kind of things. So another thing is, Deng Xiaoping was not really pro-market, was not really pro-democracy. They didn't have a gene in him. He was involved in a very tense power struggle against Mao's chosen heir apparent, a man by the name of Hua Guofeng. So he needed the United States to promote him as the leader in the United States. He was a mere vice premier of China at the time. So that's why he wants to play nice with the United States. And by doing so, I think the Jimmy Carter administration and several administrations before him also forget the Americans' enormous prestige and inspirational power over the people of China. So, because this is the age when there is full of political scandals, the Watergate, and the political and economic impotency of the Carter administration. So we're pretty much in a stage of malaise, spiritually speaking. So that's why we did not see our own power and leverage in negotiating with China, and that's a pity. We have opportunity that are missed. So that's another background. But also, I think there is also the excessive fanaticism against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was obviously not a benign factor, but there's a lot of Eastern European immigrants in this country who were in the very important position of power, and they're basically so blindsided by the single-mindedness of defeating Soviet Union, which is obviously a good cause, but fail to see the potential and nature of another nemesis, that's China. So we tend to China, whoever is against Soviet Union must be our friends. So that is a very bad sort of 18th century, 19th century obsolete political wisdom. And of course, there is also another factor, the domestic factors. I would say one is the Jimmy Carter. By the end of 1978, he knew that his re-election bid will be in jeopardy. So he needs some kind of a triumph in foreign policy, and this is a very good thing that he would do, which caused Congress backfire in the Congress as well. There's also a lot of China lobby in the United States by that time. There's a professional group of people who not just necessarily to see the business interest in China, but also they were not really happy with the American values and the United States as a whole. This is post the Vietnam War, to remind you. So when you see the Great Wall of China, the orchestrated happy faces of children in Tiananmen Square and the pandas, so you have good feeling over there. So there's a kind of popular support for this Carter move, but the Congress actually acted as a responsible factor in this whole drama.
I want to touch on something you mentioned, obsolete political wisdom or perhaps misconceptions. Something that comes to mind is this term strategic ambiguity, which you've taken issue with in the past. Where does that fit in with the Taiwan Relations Act? I mean, do you see this as evidence against strategic ambiguity, or do you see it as supporting?
Strategic ambiguity is a artificially created concept that is not in compliance with reality. In my view, there's no such thing called strategic ambiguity. There's a tactical and operational ambiguity. Yes, strategically, we're talking about whether the United States will commit it militarily to the defense of Taiwan if China attacks Taiwan. There has never been any doubt. In the Taiwan Relations Act, we're going to ensure Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. We're going to sort of use force jointly decided by the president and by Congress to defend Taiwan. And every president since Jimmy Carter, after he terminated the Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty, which bears no ambiguity at all, has stated, if China invades Taiwan, the United States will commit militarily to defend Taiwan, to repulse China's attempt to militarily take over Taiwan. They phrase the diplomatic nice words in those Taiwan Relations Act and also all the communiques is that the United States absolutely would insist on peaceful means to settle any issues related to Taiwan's future. So, in other words, if you are not using peaceful means, the United States will oppose to that. So strategically, there's no ambiguity. This phrase was created in the 1990s by what collectively called the panda huggers in the China circle to sort of create a legal justification for their China policy indolence and to justify their engagement at any cost approach to China. So in other words, they are confrontation averse. They abandon American principle and foundational precepts embodied in not only in the three communiques, but also in the 6 assurances and also the Taiwan Relations Act. So that is a shame, and I consider this continuing longevity of this concept really bizarre. That's very harmful. By the way, there's nobody, absolutely nobody in the Chinese high command who ever believes there is any such ambiguity on the part of the United States to commit militarily to defend Taiwan if China invades Taiwan. And that should just, the argument should just end there. And I think to continue to argue for the virtue of strategic ambiguity is also very, very dangerous because it shows Americans' weakness and the indecisiveness. And you may create some kind of a miscalculation among some of the more hawkish military figures in China.
So we've talked about the background of the act in its inception. It's been 45 years. A lot has changed. And we've seen new legislation, perhaps most notably the Taipei Act of 2019, signed into law under President Trump. Where does the TRA stand today? And could you just talk about its importance in our approach to Taiwan today?
Taiwan is a flashpoint in U.S.-China relationship, and that should not be the case because things have changed in 45 years. 45 years is a lot of time, right? 45 years ago, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. There was no sovereignty. There was no independence. Within the 45 years, actually since the early 1990s, internationally people recognize Ukraine as a sovereign country, as an independent country. something much more profound in the same direction has happened in Taiwan. So nationhood has developed, sovereignty has developed. So that's why Taiwan Relations Act needs to be revised. In that case, we have to consider those issues. Taiwan Relations Act is foundational. It's very important to maintain the stability of U.S.-China relationship. But U.S.-Taiwan relationship should be developed outside of the context of U.S.-China relationship. It's a totally different matter. So only China would insist on that kind of thing. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think because of historical background, historical limitations at the time, 1979, the Taiwan Relations Act also has some kind of shortfalls. Number one, I would say, is the influence of the very pernicious State Department plan submitted to Congress for consideration by the State Department in the aftermath of diplomatic recognition of China. It's called comprehensive plan. In that plan, there are many ridiculous assertions that the administration would like Congress to adopt. For example, they insist on using the words "people on Taiwan." In other words, people on Taiwan can be anybody. There's no sense of belonging. There's no sense of citizenship, right? If your parents were in Taiwan as tourists, that could be part of the people on Taiwan. So here, the correct phrase should be "people of Taiwan" or the Taiwanese people. For example, if somebody say "people on the United States soil" today, that could mean some Germans, some Japanese who are happily visiting Disney World. So that's not what really should mean. So Taiwan Relations Act adopt phrases like that. By the way, "people on Taiwan," which is a very peculiar phrase, has never been used in the three communiques China really is so much in love with. So this is actually a backsliding, in my view. Just a story as an aside. When I was in the State Department working for Secretary Pompeo, I had a major confrontation with the resident expert in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs, EAP. And this gentleman is claiming as an expert. He insists we should never use "people of Taiwan." We should always use "people on Taiwan." And I point out all this inaccuracies in that kind of argument. So that's kind of a waste of time. We still have that kind of a mentality. And also, I think in Taiwan Relations Act, the definition of Taiwan is very narrow. It should not reflect. It should have to reflect reality. That is, if we keep the offshore islands of Quemoy and Matsu, Kinmen and Matsu, outside of Americans' treaty obligation and Americans' sort of defense obligation for Taiwan, that's very dangerous. I can guarantee you, Shane, if the Eisenhower administration did not exclude the offshore islands from Americans' defense treaty with Taiwan in 1955, there would never have been the Chinese provocation and the massive shellings on Quemoy and Matsu in 1958. That's because China knew it would have very little risk to drag Americans in to fight against China. So, and of course, it will provide enormous propaganda value for China. You say we bombard the nationalist held island, and so exclusion of those offshore islands from Americans' defense pledge actually can be very provocative and dangerous. The inclusion of that should be the right way to do it. So that's a limitation, of the Taiwan Relations Act. But I think there are several other areas that I think Taiwan the Taiwan Relations Act should consider. And one of the things that I think Congress made a mistake in was when Senator Barry Goldwater himself, as an American citizen, brought the case to the Supreme Court to challenge Carter administration's unilateral recognition of China abandoning Taiwan for diplomatic recognition. The Supreme Court basically went back, if this is a matter of treaty obligation, you may have a case, but the Senate would have to object. So the Senate has to object, not the individual citizen. So the Senate didn't do that. I think if the Senate had the Senate objected to the Supreme Court ruling at the time, so the result might have been different. We might have involved more people to this national debate of incredible significance. But I think that most importantly, I think the Taiwan Relations Act needs to be revised in the area that I mentioned earlier. That is, we have to consider the issue of sovereignty. Is Taiwan a sovereign nation or not? Everybody in Taiwan, almost 90% of people in Taiwan, and all sides across the political aisles in the United States said the most important thing is to prevent and oppose any attempt to use force to change the status quo in Taiwan and along Taiwan Strait. The question then is, what is status quo? Status quo traditional interpretation is that, well, no unification and no independence. But think about that. No independence could mean two things. One is no declaration of independence, right? Another thing is not recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. Those are two things. So I think the reality is closer to the former interpretation. That is, there's no need to declare Taiwan's independence because Taiwan is already an independent country. Its name right now is Republic of China in Taiwan. So I think this kind of factor should be included in the next round of national debate about Taiwan's diplomatic and international status. I know this is also, we're hampered by historical precedents because one of the 6 assurances said that the U.S. government would not revise the Taiwan Relations Act. But I said, similar things happened to the United States before. During the War for American Revolution, for American independence, we had a law that governing the operational ethos and methods of this newly formed country. It's called the Articles of Confederation. It was enormously important, but also it was enormously ineffective. So I think we have come to the moment of looking at the Taiwan Relations Act as something similar to the Article of Confederation and decided to start something anew, something totally new, to redefine a new American law or American policy about the U.S.-Taiwan relationship based upon reality, not based upon fantasy, based upon the fear of China's fainted outrage of everything.
So I want to hone in on that. I mean, making these changes, in particular, changing from, the people on Taiwan to the people of Taiwan and real recognition would require overcoming the disposition that you mentioned that I was quite struck by, the State Department expert who was very attached to this language. Why do you think this notion that, we have to avoid offending China on this matter, why does it persist as heavily as it does? And how can we overcome that?
For decades, CCP lobby from the upper echelons of American society has been selling Americans the idea that China is indispensable to the United States. We have to really rely on China. We must get along with China. And that is wrong. China is important, definitely. It is not the most important bilateral relationship. So in Washington, D.C., everybody is just so happy to talk about how to manage the conceptually, structurally flawed bilateral relationship. They are the managers of foreign affairs. Their ultimate concern is how to do things right. It comes to the United States. It has come to the point when the United States has to consider how to do the right thing. And I think that effort began with the Trump administration, and that kind of effort and its accomplishment in the Trump administration vis-a-vis a renewed policy on China and on Taiwan has gained bipartisan support, including, I would say, the Biden administration and the current Congress as well. So that sense that somehow we have to rely on China, must get along with China by forgetting our principles, our national interest, is ridiculous. China is important, but look at what's going on in China. China's economy is terrible. It's been going on for a couple of years. It has very little impact on the United States. So this idea that somehow if China collapses, so would America is wrong empirically. And also, I will also say that there's one thing that we have to really understand, and that is that many people do not quite really appreciate this, that China needs the United States much, much more than the United States needs China. Technologically, economically, even militarily, because some of the critical components of U.S. military, Chinese military, depend on Americans' technology, Americans' know-how, and the supply chain. So it's mutual. We don't have to make China America's ultimate enemy. But the question is, China has already made the United States its ultimate enemy. Not because of our particular policies. The United States has always been China's existential threat. Not because of what we do or we don't do. Not because there are hawks or doves in Washington, D.C., but because of who we are, what we stand. Ultimately, the United States is a beacon of hope, beacon of freedom that might inspire the Chinese people. The Chinese people are the Chinese Communist Party's ultimate and only enemy. So that's why the Chinese government reacted most violently to one small component of the Trump administration's China policy announcements. That is, the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese people are completely different things. And they just went berserk on that. So that's why we have to get rid of this kind of a China aversion syndrome. We cannot really dictate our policy, our national policy, based upon how angry China might get. And we cannot really appeal to their feelings all the time. Feelings must follow rationality. Feelings must follow principles. China is a country that does not follow principles, does not really embody the idea. Even with agreements, they can blatantly misinterpret. And so they not only try to bamboozle the world, they actually bamboozle themselves. If they create some falsehoods, like the misinterpretation of the three communiques, they themselves really believe in that after a while. So that's the danger of the regime. When we say Chinese Communist Party poses existential threat, not just to the United States, not only to Taiwan, to the entire world. You can see the coming together of all the democracies in the world to face this very daunting and formidable challenge.
Well, Miles, I think we're coming to close here. Do you have any parting thoughts, maybe in particular for the people of Taiwan?
I think people of Taiwan are remarkable people. They have been under either foreign rules for centuries or dictatorship for a long time as well. So Taiwan has gained a new birth of freedom, a new birth of sovereignty and independence. The 23 million Taiwanese people have created something just no less than a miracle, right? Economically, Taiwan is a powerhouse. Technologically, Taiwan is leading the world in some of the critical sectors, right? Semiconductor, obviously, but also Taiwanese people have proven to be a good citizen of global community. And every time there is natural disasters, either earthquake in Japan or earthquake in Turkey, Taiwanese people are always among the first to volunteer to help, without seeking any sort of international spotlight. So very good people. I urge some our politicians, decision makers, particularly in the China circle, to visit Taiwan as often as possible. Mr. Henry Kissinger, who considers himself the guru of our strategic thinking, and who is very familiar with Chinese senior leadership. I'm not saying that he's very familiar with Chinese people. He visits China, I don't know how many times, maybe hundreds of times. He never set a foot on Taiwan. And that's really is not really a good way to do that. I always joke about that there should be a capital flight, which will be the name for the airline between Washington and Taipei. We should have more Congress people and executive branch people to visit Taiwan, and many people have visited China. To be fair, you got to go to Taiwan too. The food is better and safer on the one hand, and also it's very important to gain different perspective, right? So I think that's a very good. And I jokingly said one time, this is not the really good joke. I have a teenager at home, so this is a joke that has some kind of connection with the junior high quality. That is, on this capital flight airline between Washington and Taipei, there should be used three languages should be used, right? English, Chinese, and Taiwanese. We call them collectively the three communiques.